Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and this is My Life as a Landlord. I am so pleased that you have joined me for today's show. They say that people would rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy at a funeral. The fear of public speaking is a real thing and feels an awful like the fear of being a first-time landlord. Toastmasters is a great organization that helps build confidence in not only public speaking, but also in life. Recently, I was asked to speak about rentals at a Toastmasters Club called Money Matters, and the meeting was all about rentals. I've asked two of those Toastmasters to join me today, Dan Dyble and Karen Hall. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Now, Dan, you've been on the show before. You've been
Yes.
on the show with me in 2023, episode 44. We discussed on how to make a tough decision between a long-term rental and a short-term rental, and we hashed that out. Karen, is this your first time on a podcast?
It is.
Hey, very cool. Well, I'm glad we can give you this experience, and I have a feeling we're going to have some more episodes as well, just knowing what this episode is all about. But our listeners may be hearing about Toastmasters for the very first time. Karen, can you tell us what is Toastmasters?
Well, Toastmasters is an international organization that has clubs around the world. Each club, the members come in, it's a safe, comfortable spot to practice your speaking and to have fun. Make fun of yourself. Have fun with the other members. You will be evaluated and provided with positive feedback on how to improve your speaking skills, but we also teach leadership skills too.
Very cool. As a former Toastmaster, I like that the meetings are very structured. Now, Dan, in the recent meeting that I was with your club, that was actually my first Toastmasters meeting virtually. Most of the Toastmasters, well, all the Toastmasters meetings I had been to before were in person. Do they have in-person meetings in Toastmasters still, or are they all virtual?
We do money matter. So I think both Karen and I belong to multiple clubs. And for me, the reason for joining Toastmasters recently was because I'd been a professional speaker for many years and I wanted to come back and get into the rigor and maintain the quality standard that I was used to when I was making lots of money traveling and speaking. I returned looking for an in-person Toastmasters club, but where I joined or where I live, there are no Toastmaster clubs. We're just starting one now here. They used to have some, but they'd lost. So yes, there are many. And we now have what we call hybrid clubs. And my other club is a hybrid club. It's also bimodal. So it exists in two cities that are 6 hours drive apart. There are in-person meetings one week in one city and then the next week in the other city, and they're always available online. So a hybrid meeting gives you a different set of skills. I was amazed how difficult it was to adjust to being on a camera rather than on a stage. I spent 6 years touring and full-time lectures all over North America. And then got in front of a camera and it was atrocious. It was like starting all over. And what I appreciate about the hybrid club is I get to practice my in-person. I get to practice being on a podcast style. Each online meeting is like being on a podcast. But then in the hybrid meeting, you have a room full of people and you have to pay attention to the camera. And that's yet another skill set. So while you're working through the curriculum, Toastmasters has multiple curriculums that you can go through. So if you want to be a humorist speaker, you can learn humor. If you want to learn how to drive a point home, you can do that. If you're trying to prepare for job interviews, there's skill sets for that. And you get to choose. It's like going back to school, but you're in control of what the subject detail is. And that can
Love
be
it.
in person and or online.
And you get to advance at the speed that is comfortable for you.
Oh, right. Yeah. And there are different
Amazing.
levels. too.
Yes.
So we can do a podcast with you sometime about as a landlord or as a tenant or as a developer, you need to really be able to speak to people. And public speaking isn't about a large audience. It isn't about audience size. It's about making sure that you are clear, concise, and you're making your points directly. And in Toastmasters, everything gets evaluated. So your listening skills get really, really sharpened, and your ability to be able to listen to someone speak and then go, okay, how is that landing with me? And that's no different from having your landlord come down on you or have a tenant that's skitsy, or interviewing people. Do I want to live in this person's building? Do I want this person living in my building? And so all of that kind of stuff is very grounded in Toastmasters. And with 250,000 members globally and several thousand clubs, there is a club near you. And if not, come online.
Love it. Absolutely love
Good
it.
question.
Yeah. One of the things that I enjoyed about Toastmasters, and of course, the listeners know that from Paul River, British Columbia, which I know that's where Dan you are, and I helped found one of the clubs there. And then of course during COVID, it took everything out. Everything's is got to restart in Paul River. So the listeners are aware of Paul River, so they know that it's remote. But one of the things that I love about the Toastmasters format of the meetings is that there is something that puts the speakers off balance if they want to be called table topics. And in the recent episode, recent meeting that I spoke at, which of course is on this episode, this library, is the checkers versus chess, and what game are you playing and what role are you playing in the rental world. But Karen, you had created this incredible list of table topics. But before we start on, doing this roundtable and talking about the answers of these questions, what is table topics?
So, table topics is a part of a Toastmasters meeting that allows the participants to practice their impromptu speaking. People are invited to come up to the podium or the lectern, are asked a question. They don't know what that question is in advance and are asked to provide a mini speech, which would include an opening, a body, and a conclusion, speaking for 1 to 2 minutes. New Toastmasters find this very daunting. The first time I got up to do a table topics, I spoke for 16 seconds. But over time, the more you volunteer to go up, the more you learn. Your speaking skills improve dramatically. I now, if I'm told you have 2 minutes with this person, I have a very fine sense of what that 2 minutes is. And I'm doing my best not to keep them, it reaches a point where people start to get bored and things. I know not to get to that point anymore.
I love it. Well, in the meeting that I was a part of, you had created 15 questions about rentals, and they were so unique. And we did table topics, and I did one of the questions as well. But they were so unique. I instantly said to Dan, I said, we've got to do some podcast episodes about these questions. So we've created this episode that is what I'm calling a rental roundtable. I'd love to jump into these questions that you presented. But now come clean though, Karen. How did you create this list?
Okay, I'm going to tell you, I cheated a little bit. Chat GTP, I think, is a wonderful tool for anybody, but particularly within Toastmasters. A lot of times, the person who is chosen to be the table topics master of the day struggles to find appropriate questions. Toastmasters meetings typically will have a theme. And so you try to have those table topic questions surrounding that theme. I went into Chat GTP and I said, Toastmasters theme, rentals. Please provide me with table topic questions. And it provided me a list. It broke it down into 5 different categories with 3 questions in each category. so that I could then try to look at these and determine which would be the best ones for this meeting.
Well, the list that we've got here, you've broken it up. I mean, ChatGPT had broken it up into 5 sectors. And I think if we can maybe get into 1 or 2 of these sectors without running over time, I don't want to make the episode too long, but this is going to be a part 1. There is going to be part 2 and maybe several more parts, because these questions, what I'd like to do, instead of just a table topics response, which is what we would do if this was a Toastmasters meeting, you'd have 1 to 2 minutes. Love to get one of us answer the question, and then the other 2 get to respond and really make it a discussion, because some of these questions are really hard. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Good. Okay, so the first section that that ChatGPT figured out was ethical dilemmas. And Dan, can I ask you to read and then answer the first one?
Actually, I don't have them up.
Oh, you don't?
So
I
in
do.
table topics, one of the things is you don't know what's going to be asked. So I
Hmm.
did see them a month ago when we were talking,
Yeah.
but in order to do this and to demonstrate to your audience
Okay.
what table topics is really like, I have chosen to come in blind. So if
Okay.
you read the first question to me, then
Okay.
I'm happy to respond. And
Madam Table
I
Topics
try
Master,
to
if
stay
you yeah, no, if you'll read the first question, now that we know that Dan doesn't have the questions, because I have the questions here and so do
I
you.
certainly will. And Dan, just to let you know, I didn't know what the questions were going to be either. I remembered emailing them to
yeah.
Jennifer, so I just quickly opened it like 2 minutes ago. So
Okay. Karen, can you do me a
yes,
favor? Do you have the timing backgrounds?
I do.
Could you run the backgrounds for me? Because that really helps me practice staying on time. So run them table topic style. So when I'm at, you know, 1 minute, if you'll put a green background up so I know I'm at 1 minute, then at
Yes,
minute and a half, if you'll put the yellow up, and we won't enforce nuking the person when we hit red in case it
yes,
needs to be a longer meeting. But that way people will get a chance to see kind of what it's like to be trying to be tight with your
yes.
answer.
For the benefit of your audience, Jennifer, when I do that, should I just quickly say green,
Sure.
yellow, red,
Or
so
if
that they know?
Right.
sure. Yeah, no, for the audio listeners, absolutely they can. And so before we do this, let's
Yes.
take a step back. Tell the audience what do the lights
Yes.
mean?
So when you are invited up to speak on table topics, as I said earlier, you are expected to speak between 1 to 2 minutes. In order to assist the speaker, what we do is at 1 minute, we put up a green light. Then the timer at 1.5 minutes puts up a yellow light. That indicates to the speaker that they have 30 seconds left and should start finalizing their speech. The red light means that they have now spoken for 2 minutes. In a normal club meeting, what would happen then is at 2 minutes and 30 seconds, the timer would clap down the speaker, but we're not going to do that part today.
Oh, of course. So and I this is the first time that the meeting that I went to, that's the first time I've seen the lights as the backgrounds, right?
Yes,
Because all of the Toastmasters meetings that I had been to in the past, it was all physical lights. They're actually, a green light, a yellow light, and a red light for speeches that could be, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever the speech requirement is. So
yes,
this is really cool. Okay,
yes.
we've got it.
Okay,
I think everybody's ready for this. Let's
yes,
actually talk about rentals. Okay, Karen, if you'll read the first question for Dan.
I will. So, Dan, should landlords be allowed to raise rent every year, even if the tenant has never missed a payment?
Thank you for that. This is an excellent question because so often as a landlord, people, when we sign the rental agreement, people think that the rent is going to stay the same. For me, having been a landlord, my answer is yes, they should be allowed to. Now, in the province I live in, there is a limit to how much I can raise it each year. And that is to reflect, to acknowledge the fact that there is inflation and that there are things that are going to increase in cost for me as a landlord. And the province, we have trouble getting enough housing. The province really wants to make sure that we have lots and lots of housing available for people and to keep it affordable for people without driving the landlords out of business. So what they do is they limit it to a small percentage increase that's allowed each year. And my advice to landlords is
Green.
take advantage of that to make sure that you actually do increase it the amount, because putting a new roof on my house today is 4 times the cost that it was when I bought my first rental back in 2010. And it, so that would be not reflected in the fact that I had a long-term tenant who moved in. I inherited the house with a
Hello.
tenant, and it, that percentage increase by now would not represent full recoup on the cost, on the price difference, but my initial rental would have been based on what my assumptions would be for a new roof. And I assume a new roof needs to be put on every 25 years as an example. So for me, the answer is yes. To the tenants, expect it to go up by the maximum amount.
Red.
Build it into your budget. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you.
Perfect. Perfect. Karen, would you like to respond to his answer?
Certainly. Well, I agree with what Dan said, that the landlord should be able to ensure that their costs of operating the property are covered. Now, there may be some times where the increase in expenses for the landlord aren't as high as the amount that we're able to raise the rent. However, as he said, there are unexpected expenses that will come up from time to time, which could be quite substantial. And you can't go back to the tenant and say, well, I need to retroactively raise the rent to cover this cost. And also the following year, you can't increase it more than the allowable amount. So yes, as long as the rental rates are reasonable, the increases are reasonable, I think yes, the landlord should be able to, and not raise the rents just because they've gone up substantially in every other place in the neighborhood.
Can I make a point?
Please.
So I acknowledge that, Jen, you own properties in multiple countries, and each country has different laws in different provinces and states, and some do not have the rental cap that we have here in British Columbia. As a tenant or as a landlord in a place that does not have that, in order to consolidate as a landlord your right to protect your downside, and as a tenant to make sure, if I was a tenant, if this is not in the contract, as a tenant, add it and say, listen, I acknowledge that every year you're going to, and put in a 1 or 2% lift. Say, I am agreeing now to take on this. I'm willing to sign a 5-year lease. And in that, I'm willing to see, and I expect that your costs are going to go up each year. Therefore, let's put in a 2% lift or something. It doesn't have to be huge, but that way you're acknowledging that the cost of having you in there is there. And that way you don't have to worry as much about some places. The landlords get trapped into this and they actually have to evict people in order to be able to raise the rent.
Yeah.
And that's hard both for the tenants and for the landlord, because it's terrible losing a good tenant over a financial problem.
Right. And I would also like to add another comment. I do have property in one of the US states that I rent out. What I have done is I've ensured that my tenants were screened very well, so that I was confident I was going to get tenants that I wouldn't have problems with. I have had the tenants there for 7 years because my rents, when they moved in, were market rents. But as time went on, the average rent increase in the area was 5%. Well, I only raised theirs 2.5.
Mhm.
Just, and saying to them, I do have to raise it because I have increases in costs, but we're going to keep it reasonable. So now my rent is much less than market, and I could evict them. I could even where they are, there is no limit on what I could increase. But they're good tenants. They pay on time. They take care of all of the general maintenance. They only come to me with critical issues. I have no concerns. I want to keep them. I'm not going to raise their rent any more than I need to cover my costs.
Love it. Well, and both of you answered as a landlord, right? I want to
Yeah.
turn the table here. I'm going to answer as a tenant.
Okay.
There's been a white hot discussion on social media about landlords not raising the rent unless the amenities, unless the value to the tenant goes up. And this is where everyone pushes back saying, okay, it becomes an affordability issue for the tenant. The tenant's already getting squeezed because, again, they are playing checkers. They only have so many moves. Their only way to earn income is by trading time for money. And so when the landlord raises the rent, it feels like a personal attack on them. Now, let me switch it again. I'll put my landlord hat back on. The city of Toronto, the city of Dallas, Los Angeles, Paul River, British Columbia, they are unapologetic when they increase my property taxes. Unapologetic. And same with the insurance carriers. Insurance costs always go up. The costs of the value of the homes and the properties are going up, and the tax and the insurance rates are going up. The replacement costs are going up. And so everything is going up. So from a tenant perspective, it's looking like the landlord is doing this. And Karen, I completely agree with you. Most of the time, I send these rent increase notices going, I don't want to send this. I don't want to make your life crazier, but I don't have a choice because I'm running a business. I can't finance my rentals by going negative, right? And so, yeah, it's a little bit different, but that's a white
And
hot
a couple
discussion going on.
and
Go
a
ahead.
couple of years ago, the mortgage interest rates when we had to renew went up quite a bit.
Right. Well, and here's an interesting thing in Canada, because just about every mortgage is on a 5-year term. Now, see, in the States, it's a 30-year term or maybe 15 or 20, but they don't have this 5-year automatic, renewal. And so if people locked in to a lower interest rate however many years ago and they're on for 30 years, they're not going to want to move. They're not going to want to change their mortgage amount. In Canada, I forget, Mike had seen something that the majority of mortgages are going to reset in Canada in like the next 2 to 3 years. Frightening because they're all going to reset at a way higher rate, which means guess who else is going to feel the squeeze? Is also the tenants. And so there may be a wave of foreclosures. There may be a wave of homes and properties for sale. We're sort of already seeing it. Vancouver's in a bit of a crunch already. But going back to our original question, should landlords be allowed to raise the rent every year, even if the tenant has never missed a payment? It has nothing to do with the tenant. In my mind, the tenant is never going to miss a payment anyway. That's sort of a given. But should the landlords be allowed to raise the rent every year? The tenant has to raise the rent every year. That's how I take it. They must. Oh my goodness.
It's the same thing as a homeowner. You know that your cost of operating your house, the cost of heating, electricity, nothing's going down that I'm seeing.
Nothing.
I've owned property since 1983, so
Right. So the next question, I'm not sure if this is going to be a good discussion question, but Karen, if I can read this one for you, and if you want to answer, you can, and if you don't, we can go to the next question, but let's see what you think. Is it ethical for renters to withhold rent if the landlord fails to make necessary repairs?
That, Dan, did you want to time me or should I time myself?
oh, I can time you, sure.
Okay,
Sorry, I should have asked for the lights.
Two
that's okay.
seconds. My background's going to go a bit weird here, but
Okay.
that's all right. Go ahead.
Okay. So that's a very interesting question. What exactly are necessary repairs? What the landlord might think are necessary might not be what the tenant thinks are necessary. What the tenant thinks are necessary might not be what the landlord thinks are necessary. If it is things that are critical, heat, water, things that give you just your basic comfort, if the landlords are not willing to make the repairs to that and the tenants don't have any other recourse, then yes, I think it would be ethical for the tenants to either withhold the rent or to make the repairs and take it out of the rent. But some tenants, what like initially when I first bought my property in the US, my first tenants were very unreasonable. I would get messages saying, the upper cupboard, the screw's loose. I'm afraid the door's going to fall off. Followed up 2 days later with, I haven't heard from the handyman. I'm afraid the cupboard door is going to fall off. All he had to do was take a screwdriver and tighten the screw, right? To him, that was necessary, but it wasn't to me, and it wasn't urgent to me. However, if he had come to me and said, our hot water tank has broken and we have no hot water, that's critical. And I would have made sure that I had somebody there immediately to repair it. If not, then yes, they have a right to somehow be compensated for that loss of basic comfort for a period of time if I hadn't made an effort.
Mhm.
That's my take on it. So, for the
Beautiful.
listeners, I hit the yellow. No, I didn't quite hit the red.
Which means that she did speak for the minimum amount of time without exceeding the maximum. So that's the sweet spot.
That's perfect. Dan, did you want to respond to her answer?
I have done both. I have withheld rent as a tenant, and I have also done the repair and then subtracted it from my payment to my landlord. When I withheld rent, it was because the landlord had not done something and the front window of my house or of my apartment fell out and we were completely exposed to weather. We put plastic up over the window, and a week later, the landlord hadn't even dropped by to see what it was. So what I did was I contacted and they had just started, this was in Ontario, they had just put together a government body that governed rental arrangements. I forget what it's called in Ontario, but it was a tenancy review board, essentially. I contacted them and said, what can I do legally? And they said, given the nature of this, you are allowed to withhold rent. But since there's still a week and a half before the rent's due, you should inform your landlord in writing that you're withholding the rent to get this done. They had suggested I could do the payment and fix it myself, but it was such a large cost that it would have been 7 months rent. And then
Wow.
I would have been in a court battle with, and the tenancy protection wasn't there back then.
Mhm.
And I would have been in a court battle with him and probably being evicted by the police at that point. And so the best thing was to inform him. And when I did that, I also said, I've sent a copy, this is before email, I've sent a copy of this letter to the government. They're aware of what you're doing and the fact that you have not responded or shown up. And within 3 or 4 days, it turned out he just, he didn't need to show up. He had ordered the glass. It just took the company a while to make the window. They put it in, and in the end, they did get it in about 5 days late. So I paid 5 days late.
Okay. Well, that's a great story, and we've done location specific podcasts on Ontario, and so I completely resonate with this. And it seems that regardless of location in the world, if there is good communication between the landlord and the tenant, then this shouldn't be an issue. But Karen, to your point, it all comes down, is this a safety item or not? If this is an imminent safety item, like the hot water tank, then it's something where you drop everything and you go and you'll deal with it. Or a fridge breaks, or a hot water tank lets loose, or something that is imminently a problem. But if it's the aesthetic, if the handle on the fridge is loose, and it doesn't actually impact the use of the fridge, it's just inconvenient, that's different. And so the question was, is it ethical for renters to withhold rent if the landlord fails to make the necessary repairs? I think it is ethical for renters to withhold rent, but the landlord should be making those calls, whether it's a safety item or not, and you should have good communication so that it doesn't get to that point that a tenant has to withhold rent. But typically in the jurisdictions that I've done so far in the location specific podcasts, there is a slumlord clause that says, okay, tenants, you need to, there's a process to this. You need to inform your landlord what it is, why this is important, give them so many days. And there's always an X amount of days. I mean, in Hawaii, it's 5. In BC, I think it's more than that, 14, I think. But still, there is an amount of days to allow them to address it, and then you can withhold. But you've got to do it properly. And there's a process on all of them. And that's my point, is that it is that. Anything else about this topic?
Yeah, I do. On your point of communication, I have had tenants do things like at one of the houses, they decided they wanted a screen door, so they put it in and took it off the rent. I really liked those tenants, so I allowed it, and that meant that I went for the cost. But they had also put a screen door on without asking me, and I had screen doors in my shop that I had already paid for that would have cost me half. They chose a very expensive one. I did allow them to do it, but I spoke to them. I said, "You're not allowed to do anything like that without contacting me." And so we had a conversation and kind of made the distinction between him tightening a screw in your example on a cupboard and doing a structural change to the building that he felt was necessary because of the mosquitoes that year.
Gotcha. Okay. So we've got one more question in the ethical dilemmas section, and that might be all we've got time for today. Karen, if you'll time me, I'd love to answer this question. Should landlords have the right to reject tenants based on credit scores alone? What a great question. And with my landlording hat on, I must say the answer is no. A landlord can't just discredit and reject tenants, potential tenants, based on credit scores alone. Now, let me explain this. I am very well versed in tenant screening. Is it perfect? No. But am I pretty darn good in it? Yes. Because I play in multiple locations, I have to know the rules in different locations. And so I'm doing things like credit checks, we're checking references. Yes, credit scores are a factor in that. Checking employment or income sources. If someone is not actively employed and maybe they're living off retirement savings, so the bank accounts, making sure those are legit. And the reason I say that landlords should not be able to reject a potential tenant just based on credit scores is because if that is the only thing that is wrong with the tenant, why on earth wouldn't you allow them? Because I always go back to what's the story. And typically if someone has a bad credit score and everything else checks out, everything, their references, their income sources, their bank accounts, there is usually a story, and it usually boils down to two things. A life event has happened that has taken their credit down, whether it's a divorce, or typically I will find young people who bought a cell phone and forgot and didn't pay it and switched it, and their credit is now terrible, but that's the only thing wrong with them. They've got glowing references. So typically if there are other red flags, like their employment doesn't check out, they faked a pay stub, which I've had happen. I've had all kinds of crazy things happen. Then the credit score isn't the only red flag. But as a landlord, I don't think that you should just weigh a potential tenant based on just their credit score. I think
Right.
you're losing out on good tenants if that's what you're doing for your screening. There you go. Thoughts?
Very good. 8 seconds over, which is good within that extra 30 seconds. So that was very good.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thoughts, either of you?
I would like to say I agree with you
Okay.
because when I bought my first property, it was in 2009, the height of the crisis.
Mm,
Everybody was having trouble with mortgages. People were losing homes, things like that. My first tenant that I'd had my realtor do the screening for me. He did the credit checks. He did the criminal background checks. He couldn't do reference checks as a tenant because they were homeowners who
yeah.
lost their home. And as a result of that, they also suffered in the credit rating.
Hmm.
But what the realtor did was he did a little further digging and he came back and he said, other than their mortgage, all of their other payments are on time. It's only the mortgage affecting the credit score. And I said, well, if I'm going to reject him on that, I've just lost 75% of the potential applicants at this time. So, not an issue.
Yeah, I agree. The digging in, looking for the story, and trying to find out what's happened as someone is turning their life around, absolutely fine.
Hmm. I find in tenant screening that the main thing that I'm looking for as a landlord looking for the potential tenant is the tenant trustworthy? That's what I'm looking for. And if I find anything that they're not trustworthy, then the deal is off. But the credit score is only one factor of determining that trustworthiness. And you're both shaking your head, so I'm assuming you're agreeing.
Yeah,
What do you?
funniest one I've ever had was the references that this couple gave me. They gave their own cell phone numbers for these other names, and I just looked, and when I dialed, the way I caught it was I dialed the number. I had them in my phone already. I dialed the number, their name came up, and so the phone was answered. I said, hello, is this? And I used the name of the previous landlord, and they said yes. And I went through the whole thing. They gave glowing reports, and then I used their real name and said, is there anything else that you wanted to tell me? And they said, nope, that's fine. And they missed the fact that and I just, so they did not get the house.
Of course
They,
they didn't. Of course they didn't.
Yeah.
Well, you two, this has been an amazing episode, and we've only answered 3 of the table topics questions. So we're going to call this part 1, and there will be multiple more parts, which is great. But I'd like to keep the conversation going. Tell me, if a listener is interested in knowing more about Toastmasters or potentially joining the Toastmasters Money Matters Club, how would they do that?
Well, they can go in and Google Toastmasters Find a Club,
Okay.
and that will bring them up to a page in the Toastmasters website. They will put in their location of where they're looking for and say the distance around that. And it's a US site, so it's listed in miles and not kilometers. It'll be like 5 miles to 50 miles or something like that. It will bring up all of the clubs that fall within that criteria. They can then look at all of the clubs and actually click on it. It will take them to a little bit of information about that club. When do they meet? Where do they meet? Are they in person? Are they online? For Money Matters, all you would have to do is Google Money Matters Toastmasters, and it will bring you to resources to reach our club directly. We meet twice a month on Monday evenings. It is an online club and it's a lot of fun. We talk about anything related to money. Dan?
Fantastic.
yeah, that's it. That's the best way to find us is come on online. And when we say money matters, it has all the meanings that you can put into that phrase because money does matter. And it's about money matters in general. So we'll have speakers who come and talk about insurance, should you get it or not. We'll get someone from the industry talking about it. We'll invite guests in. We have special guests. We brought Jennifer in to talk about rental and about home ownership and whether or not you should rent or buy, things like that. So all sorts of things. How to save money through how can you carve 10% more space in your monthly budget by changing how you prepare your food? As an example, we had a great talk one day on that.
And it's a lot of fun.
Any parting thoughts from either of you?
Yeah, they should Google our club.
Yes.
Come
Yes.
come and visit us for a few meetings and make a decision.
Mhm.
We'd love to have you. We really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun, and I learn something new at every meeting.
Love it. Thank you
Yes,
both
I
for
do
being on the
also.
show today, and we'll join again soon, and we'll do a part 2 and beyond. Based on this, we will probably have many more episodes, which is just fine with me. So thank you both for being here.
Thank
Thanks a
you.
lot. I enjoyed the time. I'll see you in a couple of hours, Karen.